Everybody. I'm Beatty and welcome again, my friends, to the Ask Beatty Show. And it is so true, is that if people are serious and if they are really wanting to acknowledge and address and take steps to resolve whatever the issues might be, whether or not we're talking personally or whether or not we're talking about colleagues or whether we're talking about politically, it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing what we can do and how we really actually can work things out. It's a mindset. And I think that for a lot of people, we need a new mindset and we need to find a way to reset. Because what I find, certainly, and as you know, I'm a nationally recognized psychotherapist, sex therapist, author. What I find more and more over the years is the difficulty, absolute difficulty that people seem to have in just having basic conversations with each other. And of course, I see this on a personal level all the time in my practice. I see a lot of practice people and couples, and there are always going to be issues. And the thing that's so interesting is that when my first book came out, and of course, the book, for those of you who've been listening to the Ask Beatty Show, we are now going into the 12th year. I can hardly believe it that I've been hosting the show here on the Progressive Radio Network. And when I did my research, I did my research with 450 people, single people, divorced people, widowed people, separated people, and I came up with a 10-step formula that teaches people how to assess who's right for you and who's wrong for you before committing to any serious relationship. And by the way, I'm so excited that I had a letter to the editor today, actually, in the New York Times, again, trying to encourage people to hone their emotional communication and problem-solving skills. And I remember when the book first came out, I mean, I was interviewed in the national print media and national radio and television. People would ask me all the time, they would say, Beatty, in your opinion, in your view as a psychotherapist and sex therapist, what really are the most important ingredients that make or break relationships? And I remember I used to pause and I'd say, listen, this is not lovey, this is not romantic, this is not sexy. But the reality is that it does come down to our ability to communicate and our ability to problem solve. And I think that we need to do a much, much, much better job in teaching our young people in schools and in colleges the art of conversation. I mean, we ought to be able to talk about things. We ought to be able to disagree respectfully and hopefully with the mindset being to come up with a win-win resolution. In our world today, it's so often win-lose. I want to win and you need to lose. I'm right and you're wrong. And this kind of mentality, it's not only destroying personal relationships, but we know what it is doing in the world today. So what is this Ask Beatty show really all about? Well, of course, we talk about mental health issues and we talk about relationships and we talk about sexuality. And mostly we talk about how to educate and empower ourselves and keep ourselves safe individually, safe in our relationships, whether we're talking about business relationships, whether we're talking about romantic relationships. And, my mantra has always been that we need to be willing. And this is something that I think is difficult for a lot of people. We need to be willing to acknowledge and address and resolve. Of course, here we go again, resolve as best as we can, even though we can't change history, the issues that continue to play havoc with our lives and our relationships. And relationships these days, in our lives these days, they can get pretty complicated. And the one thing that I hope after all of these years that I've really been able to really encourage you about is that we don't need to navigate the ups and downs of life on our own. And sometimes the very, very best thing that we can all do is reach out and try and find some really good professional help. Now, having said that, for those of you who know me very well, you have to understand that all lawyers and doctors and therapists are not the same. And we really do need to do our due diligence, because there are many, many situations where I have found and I have seen where the therapeutic process can be very, very, very damaging. I mean, these days, if you've been listening to the show recently, I've been doing shows on estrangement, and it's been a lot of talk, in the media on the damage that many, many therapists are doing and encouraging cutoffs rather than encouraging people to find ways with their family. Now, obviously, you're not going to want to put yourself in a toxic situation where there is abuse of any kind, but the mindset of working things out, where people will be encouraged to try to find ways to move forward. That's the way I feel the world needs to go. That's the way that we need to find ways to move forward in our personal relationships. So, things to think about. And every week, as you know, of course, it's the Jewish New Year in a couple of days, Rosh Hashanah. And every year during this time, we are asked to reflect on our lives, how we're doing, what the year has been like, whether or not there are amends that we need to make, relationships that need to be healed. So it's a reflective time for Jews around the world at this time of the year. But yes, even though I'm Jewish and I was brought up in an Orthodox Jewish Canadian family, what I do every week. I ask you every single week, we don't wait once a year to do this, to really reflect on your own life and how you are doing in a variety of different areas, beginning, of course, with your mental health. So I'm asking you the same question this week that I've asked you in previous weeks. How are you actually doing? Now, the fact is that we do go through lots and lots of ups and downs, but if you're finding that depression, it's going on not just for a week or for a day, but it's weeks and months, and for some people years. It's time to own it, and it is time to be able to hopefully say to yourself, look, I've tried, I've exercised, I've done yoga, I've changed my diet, but somehow things are not coming together. So again, if you're in that sort of a situation, or where the panic attacks are just taking over your life, or other psychiatric issues, or if you're finding that you're drinking too much, or you're actually you're sleeping too much, or you're taking too many prescription medication pills or over the counter medications. I mean, these days it's like, take a pill, if you're upset, just take a pill. Well, that's not good clinical advice. So if you're finding that you're in this sort of never ending, or on this never ending roller coaster ride, today's the day, as my late father used to say, every day we have a new opportunity. We have a new opportunity to assess, to reassess, to change, with help, without help, to change our mindset and to reset. And I think that is the task. That is the task for all of us, whether or not you're rich or poor, or black or white, or gay or straight, or trans, or married, or single, or divorced. That's sort of the lesson. Those are the lessons of life that we have to really internalize, that there will always be something. There's always going to be something that's coming up in life. But rather than, give up, and I know that a lot of people, they don't have the kind of support that they would want and they deserve. And this is why, again, it's so important, when we're looking at loneliness research, when we're looking at what really helps people to maintain a sense of equilibrium. I mean, ideally, it's love, it's community, it's connection, so that if you're finding that these things are missing or lacking, again, today is a new day. You can go to a 12-step program. You can get yourself out to try and find ways, whether it's through religious organizations or through interests that you may have or you would like to have, because we all need a sense of community. And I think that Hillary Clinton was right. It takes a village. It takes a village. So don't beat yourself up if you're finding that you cannot do this on your own. And of course, we have to always, and on an ongoing basis, take a look at our relationships, and sometimes it's hard to take a really, really honest look. And I think that we tend at times to make a lot of excuses for bad behavior. And in my article in the Times, how easy it is to, consciously, unconsciously just ignore a lot of red flags. And this is why we need such clarity. This is where the schools have an opportunity, if the kids aren't getting what they need to learn at home, where there is real clarity about what ingredients actually do go into a successful relationship, whether or not it's a personal relationship, whether or not it's a collegial relationship, so that we have a roadmap that hopefully will help us, move forward in ways that are in our best interest. And I talk a lot about the goal is to find the route, find the roadmap that enables us to live our life in ways that are really in our best interest. And if we're looking at physical health, how are you doing? Your diet, your sleep, your exercise. I was saying to my guest, who I will be introducing in a couple of minutes, for me, tennis, I was number 10 in Canada as a junior. And, I'm playing the best tennis of my life, and it keeps me going. I need that exercise on a regular basis, and even being on the treadmill every day on a daily basis for me to keep myself feeling good, to keep myself feeling level, because I'm one of these people, and you've heard me say this, who happens to really suffer from seasonal affective disorder, so that when there is not enough sun, I could really go into a funk. So other than the light therapy, I have lights in our bedroom, I know what I need to do. I need to get sufficient sleep, and I need to get sufficient exercise. And that means every single day, including weight training and getting on the treadmill and tennis. So that for each of us, we have to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And, as I say, we don't need to do this on our own. And yet, if things aren't really going in the direction that you would like, it takes a lot of courage and a lot of honesty to be willing to actually say, this is not happening for me. This is not working. And it's very, very easy to avoid and deny and blame and be defensive and say, look, this is why I'm in a downward spiral. And yet the consequences of not stepping up and dealing and acknowledging and addressing and resolving as best as we can, even though we can't change our history, it can really become incredibly difficult to enjoy life. So I hope that this little weekly thing that I do, the How Are You Doing segment, I hope it is encouraging, and I hope it is motivational, so that if you've been having a tough time, that you'll begin to think about, okay, what can I do today? It's 3:15 here in very beautiful and sunny New York City. And, one step at a time. And if you need a guide for a short period of time, it is not a weakness. It is a strength. I mean, if you look at athletes. I mean, I never could have done what what I've done in the sports world, particularly in the tennis world, without a coach. And now you look at all the people in tennis and in other sports, they have many, many, many people on their teams. I mean, who would have thought that we would have had all these teams, whether they're sports psychologists or whether or not they're massage therapists. So it takes a village. So give yourself permission to do whatever it is that you need to do, not just to think about, not just to dream about, to be able to live your life in ways that are in your best interest. Because you know what? We all deserve it. We all deserve to be happy. We all deserve to have a good life. Well, I am very excited. I have a terrific guest today. Now, again, you know that I oftentimes don't have guests, and I don't have guests who want to come on the show to advertise their practices or their businesses. For me, this is a sacred place. So this guest, Patricia Barbarito, she came my way via a mutual colleague and friend, Stacy Francis, who is the owner and managing director of Francis Financial. So Patricia is co-managing partner and chair of the Einhorn Barbarito Board of Directors. She is a highly regarded trial lawyer known for her integrity. Yes, yes, we want somebody who has integrity, who's going to be representing us, and commitment to excellence. She has a formidable reputation in every courtroom in New Jersey, and her hallmark is taking the time to gain a deep understanding of her clients' situations so that she can swiftly and effectively develop a strategy and champion their case. And of course, bottom line, achieve a successful outcome. Throughout her career, Pat has been recognized as a major contributor to the field of matrimonial law, which is what we're going to be talking about. And she's advocated on behalf of a range of clients, including but not limited to high-level executives, parents seeking custody, and clients involved in domestic violence situations. Now, I could go on and on and on and continue to read about Pat. I mean, there's so much to say, but I think that what I really want to do is welcome you, Patricia, and thank you so much for being here today on the Ask Beatty Show.
Thank you, Beatty. I was so looking forward to our conversation. I know about your work. I listened to your show. So I'm so excited to dive in and talk about a myriad of topics.
Well, I'm glad you're here and we have lots to talk about. So let me ask you, for people who are, in fact, I have a couple of couples right now, and their question is to divorce or not divorce. The counseling is not happening in the way that they would have hoped. Of course, with these particular situations, there were extramarital affairs and a lot of messiness. So people sometimes don't have the kind of clarity that, that makes it, of course, this is never easy to be able to take the next step. So tell me, in your experience, do you feel that it's really possible to divorce well?
So, one of the things you spoke about in your introduction, which really resonated, was before we get to the point where we're in your office, affairs are had and distance is created, isn't it unfortunate that we didn't learn the language all throughout? So we don't get there.
Yeah.
And if we get there, it's in a more civilized fashion, but we don't. We don't learn that in school. We don't learn that from our parents for the most part. We just don't learn that. But when you get to that point, and people do get to that point, it is very possible to divorce well. But it is not possible to divorce without pain, in my opinion. Exactly. Nobody gets married thinking that divorce is going to happen. Ironically, every marriage ends, right? By death or divorce. Nobody right. stays married forever, but nobody ever understands when you get married and you're on the altar or on the wherever you are, right. Nobody thinks about the end. You could divorce well, but I don't think you could divorce without pain, heartache, disappointment, hopefully not without bitterness, but that is unfortunately part of it. And that's the sad part.
No, look, if you look at the reality of divorce, I mean, it is a death. We
It is a
get
gift.
married, we hope it's going to be a happily ever after kind of a scenario, of a lifetime. And yet, I mean, every single week I'm citing the same divorce statistics. Nothing has changed. And 48% for first marriages, 67% for second marriages, 72% for third marriages.
But I bet if you talk to anybody who's getting married, nobody even thinks that is a possibility. In fact,
Exactly.
it's a probability. So what's wrong? What's wrong with this picture? I think part of it is people aren't realistic about who they marry and their choices.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of my sort of coined phrases is that people oftentimes they don't know who they're marrying.
So they marry an image. One of the things I love that you do in your work is you talk about the 10 steps, the factors of getting. So if you
Right.
follow those, you don't end up in a divorce. But people don't. They think many
No.
times, my experience is that there's some magical reason that you marry. There's attraction, there's sexual chemistry, there's what the heck, I might as well. But
Right.
people don't take the time to
Right.
do the work. And if you don't do the work, you're not going to marry, for the most part, a partner that is sustainable through life in a partnership.
Right. Well, I mean, you and I, we talk the same language, but it is a very, very foreign language for most people. I mean, recently, every single September, and I was doing some consulting at East Hampton High School last year. Every year, I reach out to schools
Yep.
just to see what their response is going to be. So in the last few weeks, I reached out to a number of private schools, girls' private schools here in New York City. I sent information, I left messages. So far to date, nobody has responded at all. And of course, the query was, are you interested in some serious evidence-based relationship education that's going to educate, empower, and keep these girls safe? So this is a strong, strong, strong message from our educators.
Not only safe physically, because of course
Right,
that's critical, but emotionally safe. And
absolutely.
and I will tell you for myself, I'm almost 68 years old. I didn't learn this language until maybe the last 10 years.
Uh-huh.
Had I had the trajectory of my life, although it went the way it was supposed to, it would have been very different. I have daughters, I have young people in my office. I talk to young people about this all the time. If
Right.
you know, if you know boundaries, self-respect, if you understand what communication is, your life will change. And it's not
Absolutely.
that complicated, but it is light bulb moments because
Right,
we don't think about it. We think about being in love. We
right,
think
right,
about, money. We think about
right,
children. We
right,
think about a wedding, but we don't think about a marriage. We don't.
right.
It's not
One of
part
the
of our
first,
vocabulary. It makes me
right,
shocking to me. And I'm
right.
not so sure I understood that either. I do think that is a gift of age, but my hope is that we start teaching younger people this language so they
Well, I
don't
certainly
think me
didn't
or you.
understand this. I certainly didn't understand it at all. It's interesting. One of the first lines in my book is, a wedding is for a day and a marriage, hopefully, is for a lifetime. And of course, we're not seeing that, playing out at all. But, the fact is that most of the kids aren't getting this kind of information from their parents. I certainly didn't. I mean, I'm an only child. I came from a stable family, but this kind of conversation, it never took place. And in fact, it wasn't until I started to do the research for my book that I thought conceptually. Was working for many years, I treated couples, I went through divorces with different people. It never came together until the book. And now my formula, it leads me, it does, Pat. I mean, before I did this work, I would meet somebody and I'd say, I met a lovely person. I would never say that today. I met somebody who appears to be lovely. And my research, and for somebody like me who is so impatient in my personal life, my research found is that it takes about a year using the formula to find out who somebody is and isn't, and that you can't fast forward the process.
So think about it. you're a psychotherapist, your profession is people and relationships. If you didn't realize it,
No,
you
no,
imagine somebody who's a field of interest or history has nothing to do with, look, I'm in the relationship business, you're in the relationship business,
right.
even though we're in different parts of it. I never thought about it either. I divorced people, I would say, until my marriage ended and until I really did the work, I didn't think about it either,
Right,
which is shocking. But once you see it through that lens, you
right,
never see it any other way. It's
exactly.
it's once I started seeing things through the lens of taking responsibility, going through steps, it being a process, I can't look back. It's
Right.
really been a gift.
No, it's absolutely true, and yet the resistance
Oh,
of entertaining any of this, romantic stuff is it's tremendous. And every week I'm going to continue to, and I don't want to get sued, which is why I'm not going to mention the names of the schools, but I mean, we're talking about very, very reputable schools. And in fact, yesterday I contacted, there was a piece in the East Hampton Star about, well, Ross School. So I contacted Ross School today. We live about 3 minutes away from the school in East Hampton, just to see, I mean, offering them a relationship education program. So I'm going to wait to see whether or not this woman, who actually happens to be an attorney and she's the president of the board, whether or not she is actually going to respond, because it makes such a statement. It makes the statement to me is, we don't really care about these issues, and we don't care that our kids do well in what you and I believe is the most important areas of our life.
absolutely. It is the
Yeah,
fundamental basis of your professional success, your
exactly.
success as a parent, as a sibling, as a child. But it is not a language we learn. And often it's not a language we ever learn.
No, exactly. And that you look at the domestic violence statistics. I mean, 3 women, I've been saying this for years, continue to be murdered every single day by their so-called, intimate partner. And it's not about blaming. It's not about judgment. It's about education. We've got to get in there and teach people how to do a better job of assessment before they get killed.
Yep. And about self-respect. I think one of the other aspects is when you don't understand self-respect and boundaries, you take crumbs. You think attention is attention. You can't distinguish. So it's about self-respect. But when you are not raised with self-respect and boundaries, you accept behavior that's unacceptable on any front.
No, exactly. Are you seeing changes over the years? Couples who are coming to you, of course, they're not coming to go for dinner. They're coming to you probably to get a divorce. Have things changed? Are you seeing a different dynamic today than maybe 15 or 20 years ago?
So I've been doing this almost 44 years. Yes, I think part of the change I've seen is divorce has become much more acceptable.
Yeah,
So there was that shame that I saw maybe 30, 40 years ago is starting to be lifted. Divorce is not an embarrassment to many people. It is not shameful, so it's easier to talk about it. So I am. I've also seen a change in that in the last 40 something years. Women are working. The
yeah,
traditional marriage has shifted, not completely. So there's more empowerment in order to end a marriage because you could work, you don't feel as dependent. I see a change in the moral compass. I don't make judgment on people who have affairs. I think affairs are a complicated issue. I think people are flawed. I have some clients that I adore who have done very self-destructive things with outside relationships. But I have seen people be more accepting of sexual involvement outside of the marriage because our moral compass has changed in many ways. The shame of fidelity. So yes, there has been a change. There's a change with women having children later. There's a
uh-huh.
change with many, many things. So society usually changes, and then the law sort of catches up with it. And there's been a lot of changes in society. We're in a different world than we were 20 years ago and certainly 40 years ago.
No, for sure. Who are you finding, men or women, are initiating the divorce process? Has there been a change?
Yes. I think it's probably about equal. And I think the change to a large degree is because of women's economics have changed. I
Mhm.
think that when you feel you could support yourself or you're not completely financially illiterate, you feel more empowered to do something about the state of your marriage. So in that regard, there has been a change. Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
And have you found that the reasons over the years have changed somewhat, or maybe a lot, in terms of why people are opting for divorce rather than opting for, counseling to perhaps repair the damage?
So the reasons for divorce are so varied, right? I mean, they they go from everything from, economics to domestic violence to being happy. The one change I've seen, and the thing that I hear people say many times is, I'm not happy. 20, 30, 40 years ago, I'm not so sure that, there was this sense of we all are entitled to be happy every day of our lives.
Right.
So I think that's a little tone deaf when people say that. I don't know what that means sometimes, but I
Mhm.
do think, yeah, there's this sense of I'm not happy and I deserve to be happy all the time. We've raised this generation, we've raised people to think happiness is something that you're entitled to every day. And
Right.
yet we haven't given them the skills and the foundation to figure out happiness. So you don't wake up happy for a number of years, and you don't have the ability to understand what true happiness, soulful happiness is. You think I'll get a divorce. So yeah, I think there's an entitlement, to how people live their lives. I remember after the tragedy of 9/11, I remember that day. I remember clients who were supposed to come in. And I remember thinking, well, it's going to be quiet in the practice for a while because the whole world was in shock, as it should have been. Shockingly, within 2 weeks, I was busier than ever because same thing happened after COVID. I'm not happy. The world's going to end. I want to be happy. So after 9/11, same thing happened when COVID, that March of 2020, when it hit. I thought, okay, we're going to be quiet for a while. Within 2 months, we were busier than ever because people said, I'm not happy. We could all be dead. I want to be happy. So that's become a really interesting reason. Usually, things like alcoholism or domestic violence,
Right.
certainly there are reasons for divorce. They are less the reasons than we're not having enough good sex and I'm not happy.
Uh-huh. So interesting. So
Yeah.
when people come in and say I'm not happy, I mean, have most or some of these people sort of dug in to figure out what does that even mean? Is it my own stuff? Is it my own skeletons in the closet or unfinished business? Is it because in our relationships that there are things off that perhaps could be acknowledged, addressed, and resolved as best as they could be resolved, even though we can't change what I mean, do people have a sense of what it is that they're saying when they talk about I'm not happy?
Beatty, I think one of the things that we as divorce lawyers have a moral and ethical obligation to do is explore with people their reasons. I'm not a therapist, but after 44 years, I consider myself a relationship expert. And I think one of the downfalls of our practice has been we don't peel back the curtain enough.
Right.
So one of the things I do in every consultation is say, don't tell me about what's going on now. Tell me about the beginning. How did you meet? What was your initial meeting about?
Mhm.
Talk to me about how it was in the beginning. And inevitably, you could hear those relationships who had a real connection
Right.
and those that didn't. And those that had a real connection, if you explore with people, and I always give them a legal opinion, of course, about their case, but I say, go back to that. If you could get back to that,
Right.
you could get through this. And I think we have an obligation to talk to people about that because you could see the wistfulness, the hope, and other people you could
Yeah.
see, these people they never had a connection. So
Yes.
I think that's a way to look at it. And that's a way to examine why they're not happy now. Because usually, if there was such a strong relationship and connection at one point, you
Right.
could usually find your way back there.
Right.
I think, and I'm a big believer in marriage, ironically. I really believe in marriage. I had a marriage, my marriage ended. But I'm a big believer in marriage. I think marriage and life partnership is critical. I think connections are what it's all about. And I think it's lonely to not have connections.
No, I agree with you totally. And
And I think that if you want a person, you'll find your person. I don't care who you are. I believe that with all my heart.
Well, and these days, of course, it's so interesting that since most of people trying to connect is online. If you look in New York City, of course, you could always go to events and you look at, because I've been Googling recently, just almost for fun to see singles in-person singles events in New York City. Not that many.
Well, but see, the online, I think, look, the reality is online is how people meet each other. But see, this is I see the online problem as people look at online as you swipe. Am I attracted to him?
Right, right,
Is he got this kind of job? Where does he
right,
live? The problem is people don't look at core qualities.
right,
So if you go online and you focus on values, qualities, heartfelt connections,
right,
history, family, then you'll find your person. But not if you're saying, is he hot? Or
right.
does he have a great job? Or does she, whatever. You can't look at those things. You have to look beyond that. And when you do, that's usually, I believe, when people will find a connection.
Well, I totally agree. And when I think of all the people, I mean, every single person that I know who's single is online. I never hear people talking about when they're swiping, whether they're thinking about the person's family of origin or values or anything like that at all. It is about, is he attractive? Is he or she hot? What kind of work does the person do? But again, going back to the fundamentals, whether you meet online or you meet in a church or synagogue, I mean, that's the basis. That's the basis of the things that are important. I mean,
Because that's what intimacy is. Intimacy is shared values, shared culture, shared interests.
Mhm.
That develops into, I mean, obviously, there's got to be a level of attraction, there's got to be a level of admiration, but real intimacy, real sexual intimacy, real personal intimacy happens at so many other levels. And we don't think about that. Most 30-something-year-olds or 20-something-year-olds who are getting married are not thinking about shared values. It's not, they're not. They're
Yeah.
thinking about jobs, they're thinking about appearance, and that's not what it's about.
Right, right. No, I look, I agree with you. I agree with
I
you
know, yeah.
completely. What just, it just sort of popped into my mind. Of all the people who come to you, asking or seriously thinking about a divorce, what percentage, because I think you're right, you are a relationship expert, what percentage of these people, of your clientele, do you think with good counseling would be able to make it work? Maybe not perfectly, but nothing is perfect, but good enough where they would be happy enough and the marriages could be salvaged.
So I have to break that down into a couple of categories. Many times people don't come to me until they or their partner have turned the corner. It's just too
Okay,
much has
too
happened.
much.
They've just turned the corner. The
Right.
smart thing, and it's amazing to me because people don't want to come to a consultation until their divorce is definite. And I say to them, that's not the way to think about it. That's what's costly. You
Right,
should go to a divorce lawyer way before,
right,
because
right,
then you're in a
right.
position to evaluate. So the people that come to me after the corner's turned, I don't think that they could get it back. They're too
Uh-uh.
far gone. But
Right,
people who come to me and say, and I say to everybody who comes to me, you're just here for a conversation. Doesn't mean you're getting divorced. Let's
right.
start with that. I start every consultation with that. People who come to me in the early stages and we could talk, many times, I think there's at least a 50-50 chance that they can reconcile their marriage because
Uh-huh.
they're trying to understand the financial and
Right.
practical implications of a divorce, but they're trying to explore options. And they haven't yet made a final decision or become so emotionally detached that they don't have connection. And I think those people have a very good shot at staying together, unless there is, of course, domestic violence or addiction that's not being addressed
Right.
or issues that just can't be, addressed. But if it's just we've grown apart and you're in those early stages, I think you have at least a 50-50 chance of reconciling your marriage.
Do you find that most of the people who, are coming to you, with the idea that they want to get divorced, have most or what percentage have had counseling to see individual and or, joint counseling to see what the issues are and to, maybe find a way to work things out?
Probably the majority of people have gone to some individual
The
and couple.
majority.
I do. My experience, and I talk to people about that all the time. I'm not so sure it's the right counseling. So this is,
Right, right,
so, and you talked about this earlier. Unless you are somebody who really understands relationships, counseling isn't going to help you.
right, right.
There's good counseling and there's okay counseling. I don't
And
think
there's
it,
terrible counseling.
okay, so you would know
Yes.
that. But I think that people have gone to counseling. Sometimes people just go to counseling just to check that box.
Yeah, yeah.
That's actually very common. If you're going to counseling to check that box, it's not going to matter. But if
Mhm.
you're going to counseling to really do the work
Right.
on yourself, on your relationship, I think you have a good chance. But all counseling is not equal. That's the problem.
No, that is absolutely the problem, and I love what you said about, beginning at the beginning, which is, of course, in my world, it's the only place to begin, to start when everybody was madly in love and to really
Yes.
understand what went wrong. Was it the birth of a child? Was it, financial? Was it, dislocation? To
Yes.
really, get a sense of and have clarity about what took us off track. Now, maybe for some, they never should have gotten married in the first place,
Right.
but understanding and taking people on that journey. I mean, in my practice, which is now over 35 years, believe it or not, I've had very few divorces, and I've worked with hundreds of couples, and it looked as if everything was over. And I would never ever encourage anybody where there was domestic violence or there
Of
was something.
course.
I mean, none of that.
That's a different
But
fact
it's
pattern.
yes, but it's amazing what can happen. And I think that the therapist and, of course, the lawyer, we play very major roles,
Oh,
that we have to take very seriously in how we guide, our inputs, our suggestions, our advice, can destroy or resurrect
right.
a
It's so
relationship.
interesting you say that, but I call that those light bulb moments when you really understand and focus and pay attention to somebody and you bring observations to their attention that, did you think perhaps you have had this affair for, and they get that little glimmer in their eye of, huh,
Mhm.
you think there's hope, and it works. It
Yes,
works.
absolutely.
Or when a lot of times what I do is I deal with people who are the recipient of somebody saying they want a divorce. So people come to me in shock, emotional shock.
Uh-huh.
They're in that stunned stage, and that's the most painful one for me to deal with for people, because you could feel their pain. And if you are able to really understand the dynamic and talk to them about it and explain to them perhaps why the other person is feeling like they're feeling, that is very soothing and healing to them. And
Mhm.
many times, if somebody who is the recipient of the divorce or the what, if they could understand their partner's reasons
Right.
and they could shift that dynamic, the whole dynamic changes. So, I always say, it
Yeah.
feels like you're a victim, but there are no victims. And I'm not talking about domestic violence or physical violence,
Right.
but we're
Right.
not a victim
Right.
of our partner not wanting to be married.
That's
What we
exactly
are,
right.
right, we are the recipient of them changing, of them expressing feelings, but we are not victims.
No, we dance a dance with our partners. Now, we
And
may
we
not even
chose our
know that we're
partners.
dancing a dance.
And we chose, again, I had a marriage that ended, and I always say, well, I chose him. He's since passed away, so it's easy to talk about him. But, you have to take responsibility for who you choose and what
Absolutely.
role you had in it,
Absolutely.
even if objectively it might look like you're a victim, because a victim is a very lonely place to be.
Yes,
Very lonely place to be.
exactly. It's interesting what you say when people come in and that they are the phrase that you use, the recipients. Are they really shocked? I mean, is this something that they never dreamed? They thought everything was sort of okay-ish or good enough, and then all of a sudden they're in shock, not realizing how bad everything has actually been, at least from the other person's perspective.
That's a great question, because one of my questions is, have you been paying attention?
Uh-huh.
Because
No.
when you are in shock, that means you weren't paying attention. And I will often bring this to
Right.
people's
Right.
attention. I'll say, I respect the fact that right now you are in shock and you're having a hard time communicating, but you must take responsibility for not having been paying attention. Because if you were paying attention, you
Yeah.
wouldn't be in shock. But people will do anything to avoid an uncomfortable conversation. People,
Absolutely.
I'm fascinated.
Yeah.
People will do anything to keep their life in this lane, to keep
Right.
the image of their life, including avoiding distance, difficulties. They'll always say, well, I knew it wasn't great, but,
Right.
oh, I knew this, but. No, you have a responsibility to keep communication alive and open so you're not in shock. And
Right.
that's not a popular thing to say to somebody when they're in shock, but I will say that to people. And I think people appreciate that.
Because it's true.
Yes.
You see, that's the thing. It's absolutely true. And when couples are dating and they're thinking about moving in together or getting married, and they say things like, well, we never argue. There are never any disagreements. For me, that's a real red flag. It's not possible. It's
It's
not
not possible if you're communicating effectively.
exactly.
And of course, arguing and communicating effectively looks very different than just fighting. It doesn't feel like it doesn't feel it's not hurtful. It actually feels good to communicate through a healthy argument.
Yeah. I mean,
Feels
I don't
good.
know about you and your even in your personal life. I mean, when I think about, how many people that I have even attempted just to not non-professional, types, just to have conversations, whether or not you're talking about the Middle East or whether you're talking about Trump or whether you're talking about anything. And the actual either reluctance or inability or defensiveness or avoidance or blame or judgment, it's quite something that we don't know how to talk to each other.
So it's a great point, particularly with the political climate, right? Because it's a
Right.
very tense political climate. So this is my rule about that topic. I think that if you know you'll get through to the other side with somebody, like your partner or your child or a close friend, it's worth having those conversations. The rule I've made for myself, perhaps not a great rule, is if I don't think I'm ever going to get through to the other person and get through to them, or I choose not to have that conversation because I don't want, you know why? Because I don't want to give away my resources, my energy,
Yeah.
my emotional energy.
Yeah.
But with your partner or your spouse, it's very different. You must have those conversations in order to work the issue through. And if you communicate effectively, you will. And you won't end up being divorced. But people, look, I can't believe how easily, and I'm not minimizing the pain of divorce, people choose divorce
Yes.
over a more painful process of therapeutic intervention or reconnecting. Because, there's divorce is very, very expensive. And I don't mean just financially, but there's two costs to divorce. There's a tremendous financial cost, not only in support and assets, but legal fees. And there's an emotional cost.
Absolutely.
So, do you want to spend a year of your emotional life investing in ending a marriage, or do you want to spend a year investing in yourself and your relationship? But people don't want to think about those costs, but I'm very clear about them, very clear
Right.
about the emotional and financial costs.
I think the people who come to you are very fortunate because they get a perspective that probably they may not have been expecting, you
Yeah,
know?
and it's so, but see, Beatty, I don't think as a younger lawyer I had that skill set. I do think that it is
Yeah.
something that, as we know, with age, we develop, we feel more confident sharing. I'm fortunate that I'm at a point where I really want to do my best work. Every person that comes into me, I say, there goes, but for the grace of God, I or somebody I love, they have
Right.
my full attention.
Right. Right.
I think
Right.
because I think it's really important work. And I think to do what you do, I do. I like people. You do too. I have faith in people. I have faith in people's relationships and ability to love. But yet, ironically, I'm a divorce lawyer. And I do think, on the other hand, there are times where it's just not going to work. And you've got to just do what you've got to do and, get the best situation you can. But
Yeah.
95 to 97% of the times, the cases resolve themselves before trial. But our job is to do that as painlessly as possible, but it's painful and it's expensive no matter what.
In all ways,
Ah,
you said, when you mentioned, yes, you chose the road to being a divorce attorney. Just quickly, you know what, I'm looking, I can't even believe this, which is
oh,
it's 3:50. I
oh,
have a million questions that I wanted to
no,
ask you,
shoot.
but
Why don't you do it in rapid fire?
yeah, wanted to how did you end up choosing the route of being a divorce attorney?
Practical. When I entered the legal profession almost 45 years ago, women didn't have a lot of choices. I wasn't going to go bring in a corporate client or a business client, but
Uh-huh.
I knew I could bring in individual clients. It was a completely practical choice being a female lawyer in a world of men.
Uh-huh. Okay. And so there you didn't feel then that there were a lot of options for you.
I didn't, and it was a blessing that this happened because I had a good ability to talk to people and relate to people. I used that skill because, quite frankly, I was trying to make a living, and it worked out that my personal ability and my legal ability merged. So it was a very practical decision. I'd like to give you something much more interesting, but it was a practical decision for a woman, in 1980.
And it's clearly worked out very, very well. Okay, quickly, mediation versus collaborative divorce. Difference in
Um,
the pros and cons.
I don't like collaborative divorce for this reason. If it's not popular to say, if you were so collaborative, you'd still be married. I think mediation is a very effective tool. If you both, the problem with mediation is many times it's to bring A and Z together, and the people don't understand where it should end up. So the weaker person folds as opposed to getting their rights. So mediation has to be handled with people understanding what they're entitled to, not by the weaker person folding. Collaboration, I don't know. If you were so collaborative, you might still be married. That's my quick answer.
But if you look at the two process, what is the difference? Because some people don't know. If you're going to opt for mediation, let's say you're my attorney, okay? So there's going to be you, there's going to be me, there's going to be my spouse and his attorney. Is that right? That's the
Well,
process.
so mediation can be done just with the clients and a mediator, but two good lawyers, quite frankly, should be able to mediate or negotiate a divorce settlement without a mediator. A mediator should be when the sides are hitting a brick wall. You shouldn't need a mediator if you have two good divorce lawyers who can
Oh.
negotiate. When you hit a brick wall, you should bring a mediator in for an objective opinion. When people go to a mediator without lawyers, though, many times the weaker person folds. The mediator's job is to not get you a result that will be fair legally. It's their job to get you a result. And I get concerned about the non-moneyed spouse or the weaker spouse in that situation.
Well, why would somebody choose a mediator versus just trying to have his or her attorney
Because it's
work?
cheaper.
Aha.
Because economics are real. It's expensive to get divorced. So, divorce is only as expensive as people want it to be. I always say that. If people
Right.
would accept this is the range of what's going to happen in a courtroom and go along with it, but because it's a cost issue.
So
But
mediation is
two,
much less expensive.
it could be. But my feeling is if you have two lawyers and you have a mediator, you're paying a third person. The trick is to get two good divorce lawyers who are reasonable and rational and who could negotiate a resolution before you pay a mediator. That to me is the ideal situation.
Right. I mean, I can't even imagine under, those, terms that you've just described, why one would even need a mediator if you have two good divorce attorneys who are
Because
trying to.
sometimes people need to hear a third party's opinion, and that's not unusual. I mean, I'm not opposed to mediation, but I do believe two good divorce lawyers should be able to do the job.
Uh-huh. Gray divorce. Look at what's happening. We've
Uh,
never seen such numbers.
because I think people are living longer,
Yes.
and you get to the age that we all say, I don't. So younger, you think what people are going to care and what it's going to look like, and the kids are young. You get to the I don't care stage of life, and I want to have fun, and I want to have sex, and I want to do this, and people just say, what the heck? That's why I think gray divorce is happening. People are living longer, they're living healthier, they want to have other chapters in their life, and they don't care what people think anymore. We all know that as we get older, right? It doesn't matter what people think about us. And I think people are just freer at an older age. I think also baby boomers have done well economically, so they could afford to be divorced and they could afford new lives.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, so you're seeing in your practice also a surge of
Oh,
people who are older.
my practice, I'm seeing it with my friends, I'm seeing it with my colleagues.
Right.
People are sort of just saying, yeah, done. I want to go have a good life. I want to have a new relationship. I want to travel. I want to do this. I'm tired of that. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
I think there's I don't give a heck, so to speak,
Yeah.
attitude that leads to great divorce. Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I wonder, up the road, I wonder what's going to really happen. I mean, this is another subject for, another show. To the whole institution of marriage. If we're looking really in 20, 30, 50 years, 100 years, whether people are still going to want to be married, whether or not they're going to want to be happy, whether there's going to be 5-year contracts, 10-year
If you
contracts.
talk to young people, and again, I talk to young people all the time, they say, should we stay married? Well, maybe we should renew it every 5 years. Young people have a whole different take on marriage
Yeah,
than people of our generation did.
yeah,
They're
yeah,
very realistic, but I still believe you could stay with one person your whole life. I do. But young people look at it differently. Nobody thought anybody was going to live this long, live this healthy, and have this much money. And
right.
I'm not so arrogant as to not think that economics aren't a real issue, because I do think that is a reason people stay together. And sometimes that's okay.
No, absolutely. Quick question before we're going to need to wind down and then talk about this on another show. Do judges, if you once a couple, if you can't work it out of court, all right, you bring everything into the court system. Do judges at all care about extramarital affairs in terms of their monetary judgments, custody arrangements, or is it a non-issue?
For most part, small states are what we call no-fault states. It's a non-issue. However, the money you spend on an extramarital affair may matter, but it's a non-issue. However, judges are human, and sometimes extreme circumstances impact judges. It doesn't matter legally, judges are human. Facts matter.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter legally.
Absolutely not. But but an extramarital affair, if you're spending lots of money, that matters because the money has to be recouped. Or if you're out all night and you're not taking care of your kids, but whether or not you're out with your paramour or you're out, doing something else, that's when it matters. But the fact of an extramarital affair generally doesn't matter. But who
Interesting.
you're involved with. So if you're involved with a really horrible person, you have custody of your kids, then it matters. But the
Right.
fact that it's an extramarital affair, we're in no fault states for the most part. So it
Uh, it-
matters, but it doesn't.
right. Well, hey, listen, we have so
Oh,
much more that
I
we
know.
need to talk about on this
I'd
show,
love to.
on your podcast.
Yes.
I mean, all I can say is I want to thank you. Well, I
Oh,
want to thank Stacey Francis for introducing.
yes. And thank you. I mean, I love the work you do. I love these conversations. I think they're critical. I want to get the word out. I want to teach people when they're young so they're not at this point in life figuring it out. I agree with you. That's our mission.
Well, it's going to be wonderful to do a lot of collaborative things together, collaboration in a different sort of way.
Look forward to that,
Listen,
Beatty.
again, I want to thank you, Patricia Barbarino, anybody who's looking for an amazing divorce attorney. I mean, clearly all you have to do is just, listen to our conversation. So it is 3:58 in New York, and I want to thank all of you, everybody who listens every single week, for tuning in again on the SB show. And I'm going to leave you with my 2 weekly messages. They're the same weekly messages that I give you every single week. And one is to do whatever it is that you need to do to be living your life in ways that are in your best interest. And if you are not sure what that means, then find a way to reach out and get some really good professional help, because you do deserve to be happy, and you do deserve to live a good life. And secondly, of course, we all need to do a much, much, much better job, around the world in trying to accept and understand each other's differences. And it's amazing what good conversation and the desire for emotional communication and problem solving, it's amazing the impact that we can have, not only in our personal lives, but in our business and our political lives as well. So again, I want to thank you all so much for listening, as you have for all these years. And I will talk with you next week and every week at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here in New York. And have a good rest of the day. Take care of yourself. Take care of others. I love you. Bye-bye.